This is Israel at War. I'm Steve Conover. We've reached a significant episode in our series. We're quickly approaching 1 year since many of us woke up on Saturday morning to see Israel being attacked in a way like never before. Thousands of Hamas terrorists infiltrated southern Israeli towns, torturing and killing almost 1,200, mostly civilians, and taking more than 250 hostages. This includes children, women, and the elderly. Today, we have a special guest to talk through these issues Israel and the Jewish people continue to face 1 year later. Dr. Asaf Romirowsky is the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Romirowsky has been published widely on various aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict and American foreign policy in the Middle East, as well as on Israeli and Zionist history. Welcome, Asaf.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a year since Hamas terrorists entered Israeli southern towns and performed a massacre. And then the subsequent events, October 8th, Hezbollah joining in. I think it's important at this 1 year mark to remind people what happened that day. Can you walk us through the events that transpired on October 7th and Israel's response?
Sure. So thank you again for having me. We are about to mark the actual year anniversary of the 10/7 war. 10/7 did not come in a vacuum. 10/7 is the culmination of 20 years of a desire by Hamas to have the war. This is the war that Hamas wanted. It's the war that Hamas has been planning for. Clearly, the evidence that we know today, as far as what I would consider to be the metro of Gaza, or the entire city underground that was built by design for this very purpose. I mean, they are very good engineers, and they use all the money and talent that they received from the United States, by the way, and Israel, to build this entire tunnel system. We're talking about a tunnel that is about 100 miles longer than the tube in London, just to give context. They were prepared as far as sewage, electric. I mean, this was a huge undertaking. And so what we've seen, and this is really important for your viewers and listeners to understand, since Israel disengaged from Gaza back in 2005, there were already concerns and there were already signs. Some former Intel colleagues of mine and other kind of colleagues in the field spoke about the challenges and the deficits, or the blind spots, that were going to take place when it came to the Gaza disengagement back in 2005. From an intelligence standpoint, I would argue that the biggest loss that Israel had was the loss of human intelligence. So, I mean, once Israel got out of Gaza in 2005, and remember, the understanding of the removal from leaving Gaza disengagement was to not have Israeli civilians in Gaza, create a security buffer zone, and if Israel was going to be attacked, which obviously has happened, in a series of attacks, in 08 and 12 and 14, all the way up until October 7th and this current war. We've seen these kind of what the policy that Israel had of what they called mowing the grass. That is to say, you would have these surgical attacks. Hamas would come in, Israel would go in and out, try to create some kind of calm, and that would be the end of it. 10/7 was what is considered to be in Muslim theology something known as the Ghazia. Ghazia is a culmination of a kind of a euphoric Islamist militaristic attack of a high of going to basically attack the people you want to actually create this damage and chaos and havoc on, and act in a barbaric way that they acted. I mean, they were high, not only theologically speaking, but also we now also know that they were also high on Captagon and other kind of drugs that allowed them to do the barbarism that they did. You saw, exactly on a Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah, you saw people basically penetrate the fence. So again, speaks to the challenges of technologically of the intel that Israel had as far as there were signs, and the spotters were making reporting to their superiors that there were signs of activity. These are not just war games, quote unquote. They were preparing for a serious attack. And the blueprints that we have today, the evidence, was to basically create havoc, massacre, barbarism, and what I would consider to be a modern day Holocaust when there is a state of Israel against Israeli towns and cities in the south. This resulted in the killing of 1,200 on day one, and the capturing of hundreds of hostages without any kind of discrimination when it comes to combatants and non-combatants, women, children, elderly, babies were all taken. Not to mention the massacre of the site of the Nova Festival, which was a music festival that was, again, indiscriminate killing left and right by Hamas, all validated by this action of what they believed to overtake the occupier. They came with their own um, evidence. That is to say, that they came with their own GoPro cameras to document what they did. We have letters and evidence of saying how proud they were of how many Jews they killed that day. It's also important to note that politically speaking, the first people that were taken were, these were peace workers. I mean, so this is, from an ideological perspective, again, no distinction whatsoever, right, left, or center, and similar to what we saw in Nazi Germany and what you're seeing today on American college campuses. They're calling for death to Jews. And this is in 50 years, I mean, also important historically to note, it was almost on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War of 1973, where Israel back in 73 was caught in a surprise attack. There too, maybe the difference was that Israel had the intel, misread it. There were a lot of mixed signals and whatnot. Here, there was a total failure of a lot of systems, intelligence-wise in particular. There's a great deal, there was, and there still is, there was a great deal of focus pre-10/7 on Iran, but not as proxies. And they clearly missed the boat on this war that Hamas has been planning for years and years to come. There is more evidence. There was the head commander of the Gaza region who said that there was an intel report, a declassified report that came out of late, where there was almost a blueprint to a T of a potential 10/7 Allah attack that, again, was ignored. So there has not been any kind of commission, any kind of investigation yet. There will be. But this is a war that has been horrific and has taken a massive toll on the state of Israel and on the Jewish community and the entire pro-Israel community in general, I would say, throughout the diaspora. And we are facing, to my mind, I know this is a long answer to a short question, but there's no short questions here. I apologize for that. We are dealing with a war on three fronts. We are dealing with the perpetrators of 10/7, as you mentioned, Hamas and Hezbollah, north and south directly. You're dealing with the patrons, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran, Lebanon, Malaysia, Turkey, the Qataris. We cannot we cannot ignore all the state-sponsored groups that sponsored 10/7 financially, ideologically, and whatnot. And we're also dealing, I'd be remiss, if we hear, when we're talking about the reality in the United States and in Europe, is the war on American college campuses that is being propagated by the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is another front, which is also part of what's happening culturally and politically. Whatever happens on campus never ends on campus, and you've seen this throughout the DNC and other kind of political events. And you're seeing it take a place front and center now with the current presidential elections.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that because a few of us were just in Israel and we visited the Nova site, the memorial there. And when I came back, people would ask, "So, how was your trip? And did you go to the Nova site?" And a lot of us were thinking, how do you process the unthinkable of what we experienced there? And I agree, it is a Holocaust on Israeli soil. So, but what's also unthinkable to me is what you started to talk about is the reaction that we had on college campuses and the anti-Semitic attacks we saw in Jewish neighborhoods. Uh, that's been another difficult thing to process.
100%. I mean, the entire Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, as an historian, as someone who spends a lot of his time on campuses and dealing with a lot of these issues, has been described as what a perceived fallacious construct, that is to say, of what is known as the settler colonial construct. And so Israelis are white settler colonialist movement that basically came and colonized the area. And that's the paradigm in which the conflict has been looked at. And it's important to note that because the immediate, again, to my point before, that this does not happen in a vacuum. The groups on American college campuses, namely groups like the Students for Justice in Palestine, the Palestinian wing of, an affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood on American college campuses, the immediate response by their students and their faculty on 1010 and on 1011, again, to show you that they were prepared. There was, we have toolkits of how to activate and how to mobilize your campuses post 10/7. You had leaders of Hamas thanking American students on Arabic TV and Hamas outlets on Al Jazeera and other places saying, "We appreciate your work and support on American college campuses." But what is critical to understand to that point is that if the understanding was that this was indeed colonialism, then the immediate response is that this is decolonialism, which is why it was rationalized, why it was approved, and why this was legitimized. And so that was the immediate response you saw on American college campuses. Moreover, something to compare and contrast, even after 9/11, you didn't see the kind of zeal and adulation and pride of walking around campuses with flags of Al Qaeda. Here you have individuals walking around in pride and support as a badge of honor with flags of Hezbollah, Hamas, Al Qaeda, ISIS, and all supporting terrorism on American college campuses. We have quotes, a plethora of quotes of faculty who would say that they are exhilarated. This was awesome. They are active participants they were in the encampments in the spring on American college campuses. So you had the zeal and adulation of support for terrorism, which is antithetical to my mind to the Western American liberal university, where they're promoting totalitarian ideology and terrorism in the name of academic freedom. This is racism. This is anti-Semitism. And so what you're seeing here is they are the front lines of this. And this is a critical and important point to note. The Palestinian Authority, which is a successor to the PLO, and that predominantly Palestinians at large, after the Six-Day War, came to the conclusion that they may not be able to defeat Israel militarily speaking. However, they will be able to win the hearts and minds. And winning the hearts and minds was a process of hijacking what we call in the social sciences agents of influence or agents of soft power. And that starts with the academia and journalism. And so there has been since the 1960s a slow but sure capturing and hijacking of the academy with the idea of buying departments, buying chairs, with the idea that if you buy a department or a chair in these specific fields, Middle East studies, humanities, religion, political science, and whatnot, you also buy the politics in which these topics are being taught. So fast forward to 10/7, you already had a pre-existing architecture of faculty, of students, of now graduate students who've all bought into and have drunk the Kool-Aid and basically have been teaching based on this entire ideology. And so you didn't have to go very deep to basically jumpstart or accelerate this entire chain reaction that has been happening on American college campuses. We've seen this in the 1960s. Then fast forward, we saw it in 2005. After the Durban conference, with the rise of what is known as the boycott movement. BDS, boycott, divestment, of sanction, which is economic warfare against the state of Israel, with the sole goal of isolating Israel, from an economic standpoint. That's economic warfare. And you started to see targeting of individuals, of institutions, whereas one cannot, if you are sympathetic or pro-Jewish, pro-Israel on campus. Let me make it clear, pro-Israel. That the immediate gut reaction, if you are saying that you are a Zionist, then the immediate reaction is that you are a racist. And so this is where you have to pick and choose whether or not I'm a Zionist, because you are immediately labeled and branded as a racist, because Zionism is racism, echoing the UN resolution that was repealed back in 1991. That Zionism is a form of racism, even though it was repealed. It is still alive and well, believe me, on every American college campus. And so people are forced to choose, faculty and students, whether or not they side with Zionism, which is factually Jewish nationalism, but it's being branded as a form of racism, or you're on the side of good or evil. And they've made this into kind of a binary perspective of how this all plays out on American college campuses. And it is nefarious, it is insidious, it is calculated. It is no longer just about the humanities. It is found in the STEM areas as well. You had, for example, after 10/7, you had nursing school students who said, don't bring me a Jew over here, and I'm quoting, because I'm going to stab them. I mean, these are the kind of comments that we heard and saw, and there's a plethora of evidence on social media, in their classrooms, all over the place. And so this is part of the hype, the same kind of exhilaration that you saw with the barbarism on the ground that was happening in towns and villages in the South. You're seeing that same kind of zeal on American college campuses.
In the South, we saw the vehicle graveyard that was there, where a lot of the vehicles that were shot on the highway there in the South. And it wasn't enough. You were talked about the barbarism. It wasn't enough that they were killing people. If they had time, they were burning their cars after they were killed. They were doing all kinds of horrific acts. And to think that that's on the campuses, it's chilling, really. But that's insightful to understand the years that led up to that kind of thinking that made it possible that we see these unthinkable things happening on our campuses as a reaction to October 7th. I noticed something for a lot of those in America that haven't been to Israel. Maybe they don't understand the geography, and there is confusion about some of the players like Hezbollah and Hamas. They're pro-Israel, but they're confused by how it all fits together. I was wondering if you could take a moment to contrast what Israel's dealing with Hamas and the complication of the hostages, and why things seem to be moving so quickly in the north with Hezbollah, where we saw much of the leadership eliminated quickly.
Good question. So let me also contextualize. First of all, from a geographical side, Israel is the size of Lake Michigan. I mean, we're not talking about a large country. And you could get through the entire country within 10 to 12 hours, if you were driving through all of this. Hamas sets up shop in Gaza. Hamas is a direct affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1987. It's also important to note we're here in the in the greater. I mean, I hail from Philadelphia. One of the first evidence of Hamas ties in the United States was a result of a 1993 meeting that was located. We have evidence today of a mosque in South Philly where there were minutes about Hamas in America. The understanding was that if you can't actually fight the fight on the ground, you can contribute financially based on one of the five pillars of Islam, zakat, tzedakah, charity, and you could give to the cause. And so this is also just important, from 87, by 1993, they're already fundraising in the United States for the cause. The Muslim Brotherhood started in Egypt in 1928. And this ideology was based on the understanding that Western ideology, American ideology, one of the founders of the Brotherhood, Said Qutb, was in the States, is too promiscuous, and we have to fight that. We have to become more orthodox, more vigilant, more religious, more indoctrinated in this interpretation of what we believe to be Islam to be. And so the miscalculation regarding Hamas was by CIA and Israeli intel that in the 80s it would be a counter to the PLO. Everybody was focused on Yasser Arafat and nobody was focused on Hamas. And the idea was that maybe we could create some kind of schisms within Palestinian society, and Hamas could be that alternative. Obviously, that was a wrong assessment and came back to bite us. And so Hamas has been operating in Gaza since 87. After Arafat dies in 2004, Hamas is formally elected as the majority party in Gaza. And basically everything in Gaza is run by Hamas. It's kind of a mafioso type mentality. They sell themselves as a charity group. They sell themselves as they do, Meals on Wheels. They do social services. They do education, which is part of where the indoctrination takes place. They are part and parcel. They work together with the UN Workers Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees, which is UNRWA. It is the UN group that is solely devoted to the Palestinians, the maintenance of Palestinian refugees, and so we found evidence that many UNRWA workers were Hamas workers. UNRWA does not make any distinction between who they hire. You could be a teacher, gardener, driver by day and a member of Hamas by night. And as we saw yesterday in Lebanon, the head of the teachers union was an UNRWA worker as well. So all that by way of saying that you have in the South, Gaza is governed by Hamas, this terrorist organization, since 2006. Again, coincides the year after the disengagement from Gaza. Palestinian society in that area is Sunni, also important to note as well. And in the north, to contrast, you have a group known as Hezbollah, which is a direct arm of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Has been operating for decades in the area itself. Hassan Nasrallah, the CEO of Hezbollah, who was taken out now by Israel last week, has been at the helm of the group for the past 32 years. And Israel has formerly fought two wars with Lebanon, where Hezbollah was a main player in all of this, the war in Lebanon in 1982, and of course the war that was started and began by Hezbollah in 2006. And so and what's important to note as it relates to 10/7 is that they are all being funded and sponsored by Iran. Now, the biggest cleavage in Muslim understanding is between Sunnis and Shiites. It has to do with who is the true follower of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the fact that Hamas is Sunni and Hezbollah is Shia, you can clearly say here under the arm of Iran that there is a willingness to come together under a greater evil. And that is what they believe to be the Zionist entity, Israel, the West, the United States, and they're willing to combine forces to bring that together. To your actual point, I mean, it's important to note, Hamas has been a tactical threat. Hezbollah is a strategic threat. And let's put that also into military context as well. When Hamas started this war on 10/7, they had 30,000 rockets without precision guidance missiles, but they had 30,000 rockets that they were able to smuggle in through the tunnels that came in from the Egyptian side and other areas. They were able to raise large sums of money to make all of this happen. Hezbollah has close to 200,000. And even so, 200,000 with precision guidance missiles would potentially, there's rumors about chemical weapons and whatnot, directly sponsored by Iran. Let's put it into context as well and to exemplify my point further. In 2005, after the JCPOA, they were the biggest beneficiaries of those funds that went to Iran, because for Hezbollah, it was never a question of if a war, it's a question of when to have a war, because it's all about, can they afford to have a war? And so Hezbollah is well armed, well positioned, and by Hezbollah's name alone, Hizbat Allah means an Arabic party of God. And so the fact that they believe that they are operating based on divine intervention by God's work to basically eradicate the Zionist entity. To quote Nasrallah himself, back in the early 2000s, he was quoted that Israel's creation is wonderful because all the Jews are in one place. We don't need to go look for them all over the place. They're in one place, so it's basically a sitting target for us to basically annihilate them. And so what has been happening since 10/7, you've seen Hamas and Hezbollah meeting together in Lebanon, coordinating these events, making sure this happened. To your point before, Hezbollah attacked, on 10/8. They were already close to 9,000 missiles that came in from Hezbollah since 10/8 all along. There are close to between 60 and 70,000 Israeli citizens been removed, displaced from the north, that they can't go back. And so it's been a challenge. And the challenge, to your earlier point, which is important to kind of unpack, is the fact that, first of all, Gaza is not a state actor. All right, so Israel, is dealing with urban warfare in a highly densely populated area in Gaza. Hezbollah is positioned in Lebanon. Lebanon is a state, and so that position, a different kind of layout, that they have to deal with militarily speaking. However, the modality of the tunnels, the modality of suicide bombers, the mastermind of all that is Hezbollah. I mean, they came up with the idea of suicide bombers and suicide attacks and all of that, and they were adopted, they were emulated by Hamas. It is important to note that up until 9/11, the group that has more American and more Western blood on their hands is Hezbollah. Let's look at the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. That was all sponsored and done by Hezbollah. One of these latest leaders that were taken out of late over the past few weeks, Fuad Shukr and Ibrahim Eichel, were part of all of that. And Nasrallah himself. I mean, so this, understand that Israel's enemies are America's enemies and Western enemies at large. Since 10/7, there's been a lot of tension between Jerusalem and Washington as to how the war has been conducted. And there's been a lot of stop and go. And I would say that to some extent, from my vantage point, Israel has been fighting with one hand behind their backs and was dealing with defensive issues. And again, it took a long time to reestablish deterrence and how to deal with Gaza. Gaza is highly densely populated, and can you deal with the civilian element, whatever that exists within Gaza, and to disentangle the combatants. Now, of course, Hamas fights as Hezbollah does within the civilian population. They use and they abuse civilian buildings, the hospitals, schools. I mean, they fire from within. I mean, the entire base of operations was a Chifa hospital. I mean, so, 10 stories down. But this was all part of the architecture that would create an environment that Israel would attack these areas, and they would create, so-called quote unquote mass casualties without non-discriminating between combatants and non-combatants. That's not the case. No other country and no other in the world sends out leaflets and text messages and sends maps, here are the safe zones, where to go. We didn't operate that way in Iraq or in Afghanistan or anywhere else. So it's important to understand, the different, the different landscape that we have to deal with, all very complicated. Well, to your last point, it's important to note that I think that Israel now is at a point where they've taken off the gloves. And to my point before about the fact that you have 60 to 70,000 citizens who cannot be living in their homes today. They can't go to school. I mean, they are displaced inside of Israel. It's an untenable situation. I mean, you could look out the side of your house and you're seeing a Hezbollah flag, flying. Not a good sign. Hezbollah has abused and violated UN Resolution 1701. They've gone beyond the Litani River. I mean, and the resolution itself calls for, even 10 kilometers beyond the Litani River. They have violated every red line there is. So it got to a point of an untenable situation where Israel was fighting a war on 7 fronts. But the closest fronts that they're fighting, as far as that are bookending the state of Israel, given the size of Israel, is Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, and you have a point where Israel is being squashed, in this regard. And the fact that Hezbollah has long-range missiles that could target center areas of Israel, including Tel Aviv and whatnot. They have the guidance missile system. So even after the taking out of the heads of this Hydra, Hezbollah is still, first of all, taking its marching orders from Tehran. Let's not forget that, as far as who's calling the shots. And they have, even if we took out some of their stockpile, 200,000 with Hamas having 30,000, they have enough that creates a significant threat to the state of Israel, which is exactly why you're seeing Israel fighting back now, and for good reason.
Last year, I was on a northern border town where there are 8,000 residents, and I just spoke to one of our contacts there, and there are 1,500 that have remained in that town. But in the earlier part of 2023, they had a rocket hit right in the center of town, and it's just an awful way to live. You can look over the border and you can see a couple of Hezbollah outposts. And because they've been in violation of what was agreed upon to have this buffer, that's why when we went this last time, we see families in the same hotels we're in Tel Aviv trying to live life. And like you said, it's untenable. They cannot go back until it's safe. So do you think that Israel will finish this, meaning getting them back to that river, the Litani River, and then if you come over this river, we're going to take care of it because our citizens can't live their lives and function unless we have that buffer zone?
Right. So to your point, there has to be what happened on 10/7, above all, was a breaking of the social contract between Israeli citizens and their government. I mean, you're talking today about an entirely scarred country. The level of PTSD is insurmountable. And you have an entirely country that has been displaced. To your point about there is no tourism really going in, the hotels are packed with Israeli citizens who've been displaced from the south and from the north, not knowing if they can ever go back to their homes in the south. There's not even clear whether or not they will go back or able to go back psychologically, given the fact that families have been destroyed whoever is left of those families. And so here in the north, you cannot guarantee kids' safety going to school. You cannot guarantee. There are blind spots. You talk to mothers in the north. There are blind spots where they don't know if the kid gets on the bus, whether or not the kids get to school in a safety, in a safe environment. These are real live problems that they have to deal with. Israel needs to reestablish its deterrence. The buffer zone needs to be established not only in the south, but also in the north. Hezbollah has basically hijacked the entire Lebanese parliament. They are part and parcel of the Lebanese parliament. So Lebanon is a significant area. I don't see, I mean, Israel has a long history of wars with Lebanon, as I mentioned. The war, Israel was in between 82 and 2000. Israel was in Lebanon. I don't think that they want to go back into that situation again. However, Israel, going to Beirut and, and kind of, clearing the area. Hezbollah needs to be dismantled. Hezbollah has proven to be an existential threat to the state of Israel. And I think that while they're talking about a small war, I mean, again, there's nothing small about any of this stuff. There has to be a position in time where they're able to reestablish concrete boundaries of safety and security for their citizens on both ends. The bigger question of the day after tomorrow scenario, which it's hard to, there needs to be a lot of thought going into this, both in the South and in the North, is what kind of presence is going to be in the area. Whether or not it's multinational forces, which again, the UN have proven to be feckless and useless on these issues in general. Are there going to be any Arab states that Israel has normalized ties with that are better? I mean, on a positive note, it is important to note as well that what we have seen positively in contrast to 30 years ago is that the countries that Israel has normalized ties with, including specifically the countries that were also now have new normalized ties as a result of the Abraham Accords, they have been standing with Israel. Jordan, the Saudis, you're seeing more comments out of the Gulf. You had the King of Jordan. Israel has had peace with Jordan since 1994. Back in April, when Iran attacked, jumping in his fighter jet together with his daughter, who's also a pilot, and taking down missiles that are being waged against Israel from Iran. So you do have a different environment as far as within the Arab world at large that sees Israel as an asset rather than a liability. And so those are relationships that need to be capitalized on. However, I think that these non-state actors, all sponsored by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is exactly what we saw yesterday when you had Iran attack Israel, and Iran is still calling the shots, and Iran has nuclear, is within reach of a nuclear bomb. And that's why they are the greatest destabilizing factor in the region itself. And to reestablish deterrence in the region and to reestablish clear lines of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, this is the war that we're fighting now.
You mentioned Iran's wave of attacks in April, and then we just experienced a second wave. How is that significant that Iran is sending waves directly to Israel's soil?
Iran sees itself as, from the kind of historical perspective, Iran sees itself as, they think about Persia, the Persian Empire. They're Iranian. They believe that to solidify their existence as and reign supreme over the Muslim world, from a theological standpoint, they see the return of what is known in Shiism as the Mahdi, which is kind of the Shia Messiah that will solidify Shiism at large. There has to be some kind of apocalyptic event that takes place. That kind of event through some kind of Armageddon can happen through nuclear force. And so that's a theological explanation for the nuclear plan in a nutshell, why Iran exists, why Iran has been producing and getting close to that point of the bomb itself. Iran is following through on its messaging. I mean, because these are Iranian proxies, they're very patient, they're very calculated, they're watching all of this, and they're following through. And when their leadership, Hassan Nasrallah, who's taking his marching orders, who has for all these years out of the Islamic Republic of Iran and getting financed by the Iranians, was taken out, not to mention members of the Iranian Guard who were in Lebanon, who were meeting with, Nasrallah. I mean, the amount of Iranian Guard activists and commanders and generals who are in constant contact with Hezbollah. From a geographical standpoint, Lebanon, Hezbollah itself, represents all the way from Iran to Lebanon a consistent Shia line. And so that consistency has been maintained by the Iranians. So, of course, and if you read the news coming out of Tehran today, their response was defensive. That is, they're saying that they are the victims of this reality. And so they like to play it both ways. And so that's why they're rationalizing their attack as legitimate. We are defending ourselves. Which is a total kind of draconian 1984 reality way to put it. But Iran has been the one responsible and perpetrating all of this stuff. But their egos won't allow them to stand by. There will be retaliation. And there has to be consequences. And I think that Iran is also testing the waters. They're testing the waters how we are going to respond here in the United States. How are we going to stand by our ally Israel? Are we going to make sure that they have what they need to do to fight back? And we should. I mean, there is, as I said before, Israel's enemies are America's enemies. Justice has been served. Those leaders who were taken out by Hezbollah, have American blood on their hands. And they've actually had American bounty. Shukr and Eichel, respectfully, each had, between $5 and $7 million on their heads. And so let's put it into that context as well, how we saw them as an existential threat. We need to stand by our allies. We need to reestablish deterrence. The perception in the region in 2015, which was confusing to Saudis, the Egyptians, and others, that America was shifting foreign policy, or what the Obama administration called the realignment. And that is to say that they're moving from supporting Sunni Arab states to Shiism as a result of the Iran deal. That's how it was internalized by the Arab Sunni world. That was a mistake. And I think that clearly Iran is a state-sponsored terrorism, cannot be trusted, and we need to make it very clear. Throwing carrots at Iran or throwing billions of dollars in relief sanctions, allowing the Iranians to thrive, has only come back to bite us. We have the capability to take out Iran. We should be taking out, there should be a military option on the table. For the past 20 plus years, that's been actually the biggest tension between Jerusalem and Washington, having a military option on the table. It wasn't about the execution of taking out the Iranian nuclear facilities, which is complicated because they're underground. You got to calculate where how to surgically attack the facilities. If you haven't hit the centrifuge, you haven't done anything. It's not like Osirak of 81 when Israel took out the nuclear reactor in Iraq. It's a very different mentality. But there has to be a verifying of the kill, and that's where the collaboration between the U.S. and Israel. It's a very different environment now, given the fact that Israel has many more ties with the Arab world and they understand the greater threat of Iran. But it also has to do with the question of American foreign policy in the region, because the other layer of all of this, if you kind of zoom out, is, of course, Iranian ties with the Chinese and the Russians. So long as the Iranians have ties with the Russian and the Chinese, they are guaranteed economic money coming in. And so these are all part of the attempts to change the Middle East. And we should be cognizant of what's happening in the region, the larger players and the players on the ground, and act accordingly, to my mind.
One of the heartbreaking elements of this year has been the hostages, and I don't want to forget about them in our conversation. Where do you think that's headed?
We can't, and it's important to note as well. The hostages have been one of the more difficult psychological warfare that Israel has had. Israel is a small enough country that everybody knows somebody. Everybody knows the faces. Everybody knows the names. You have, I'm sure, when on your trip, you've been to Hostage Square. The families are there. They're talking. American hostages, Hirsch Pollen, who was one of the latest who were, murdered before the IDF was able to get them amongst the other hostages, became an American poster child of the hostages. And Sinwar has probably surrounded himself by the hostages because it's his lifeline. They know that they can, dangle them in front of the Israelis, and this is the hardest part to play. It's also been very difficult because Israel is committed to its citizens, and dead or alive, to bring back families to a Jewish burial, to bring back families home altogether. And so they have shown their card in the sense that, and by the way, to that point, that's exactly, even people that were killed on 10/7, the bodies were dragged back into Gaza for the sheer use of using them as political pawns. And so this has been extremely emotionally difficult. And every day that goes by, we are almost a year, since the war began. These families have to deal with this reality. And the biggest challenge for Israel has been, from a military standpoint, how to win the war. And this is why it's been, to your earlier question, so difficult without jeopardizing the safety of the hostages. By the way, the Red Cross has never been allowed to go visit them. We don't know about their conditions, their medical situation, whether or not they, what their conditions are in general. We know the stories now today about the rape and the abuse, and the psychological abuse, the physical abuse, all over. I mean, it's documented throughout. It's horrific. And Israel is doing everything it can to bring back these hostages home. And this is why the message of the deal needs, that the U.S. has been trying to help broker. But again, the challenge has been, who are you brokering with? You're not dealing directly with Hamas around the table. You're dealing with its interlocutors, and you're dealing with the Qataris, who have been, on the one hand, allowing safe haven for Hamas leadership to live like kings in Doha, and they're around the table negotiating the situation. The Egyptians as well have allowed basically the entire flow of Gaza's economy has been as a result of Egypt. They are the oxygen of Gaza, allowing the flow of goods, of materials, of weaponry, of training coming in from the Egyptian side. So there's a catch-22. And Israel has been able to bring back some hostages. The first deal that came early on was as a result of a brokerage. The others that were saved were as a result of better Israeli intelligence, as a result of capturing Hamas members. But it's a horrific challenge, and I don't have a good answer of how to solve that. But I can tell you that it's on everyone's minds, that people want to bring them back home as fast as possible. And over the years, Israel has done, as we saw with the Gilad Shalit deal, where they gave 1,100 active terrorists to get back one soldier. One of them happens to be Sinwar himself, who never gave up the ideology and said that he was going to go back and kill more Jews. And by the way, everyone who is going to be potentially released is committed to that cause as well. So that's what you're dealing with. And so, but Israel is committed to bringing back its citizens home as much as possible. And there needs to be more pressure. I mean, the war could have ended a long time ago had Hamas said, here are the hostages, and, the war ended. But they don't want that. They have no incentive to end the war because they know that all they want to do is come out the day after tomorrow waving their flags and celebrating and saying, look, we're still here. If Hamas is still there the day after tomorrow, Israel has failed. The objective of the war has been from the beginning of the war the entire dismantlement of Hamas, given what Hamas has done on 10/7. And you saw that reality. So the tension is, how do you fight a war without the hostages, and how do you save the hostages without fighting the war? And that's been the delicate balance that Israel has unfortunately been dealing with for the almost now a year later.
When we were there last week, there was such an obvious contrast in society and the cultures of Israelis and what we saw done by the Hamas terrorists. And there was one of our agencies, so we've visited several of our agency partners, and you're seeing the Israel society repairing the world. You see them saving lives. We went to a blood center. We did different things. We went to a wounded soldier complex, and seeing the preservation of life, the saving of life, and then the contrast of that Nova site of just a culture built on hate. And there was one of our agency partners gave a quote. I have to paraphrase it, but it's a common quote. And it's been ringing in my head for several days. And the quote is about how the health of a society is determined by the way it treats its most vulnerable. And nowhere other than the Nova site can I think of that I felt that more deeply, where we're seeing Israelis giving blood, we're seeing them care for wounded soldiers, we're seeing them take care of emotional needs for the people of Israel and caring for each other, and then to just see the, as we said, the unthinkable in the Nova site. So I think that's part of what makes it so hard to get our minds around, because I don't think our minds were ever meant to get our minds around those kinds of things.
I mean, it is the Jewish ethos of the state of Israel. I mean, the what you did see positively. I mean, let's put it into also the context. I mean, a week before the war began, a pre-10/7 reality, you had Israelis protesting about judicial reform and also debates and whatnot. The war starts. The outpouring of volunteerism that you saw in Israel for the soldiers and for everybody. I mean, just giving back anything they could give, food, clothing, anything was there. People were standing on the border cooking for the soldiers. The level, hospitals. I mean, it's unbelievable, the outpouring of support and volunteerism, taking people in for who've been displaced, not only hotels, people who couldn't afford to go to hotels because the government wasn't, ready to be prepared. You had, kibbutzim, you had, towns, volunteering homes and, whatever, home hospitality for unknown time, indefinitely, because nobody knows how long it's going to take. So the level of camaraderie of coming together is heart, is really is emotional, and that's quite telling about the society itself. Everybody's aware. I mean, Israel is so small. Everybody has been impacted in one way or another. Everybody knows somebody who lost someone. I look at the pictures. I mean, some of the young soldiers who were killed early on, I knew their parents. I know their parents. And it's awful. They look exactly like their parents. And you look at these images and you look at, the generation of kids. And you talk about this is also very important, I think, to note psychologically to your point. This is a TikTok generation, and the question was, where is the Zionism, of today? And here you have these kids who are willing, who have put their lives on the line and committed to the safety and restoration and the triumphant success of the state of Israel at any cost. People are leaving their homes, leaving their businesses. People, the country has fully committed at people's own expenses economically. I mean, the country is suffering now as a result of where every effort of the state of Israel has been given to the war effort. And it's going to take years. I mean, agriculturally speaking, even from an economic standpoint, those communities in the South, which were agriculturally based communities, the amount of agriculture that was destroyed, they're estimating it could take them another 20 years to repair what was lost. Not to mention the physical structure and everything else, the psychological damage and whatnot. This is a long process. Israel will survive, Israel will overcome, and things will happen. But this is a scar that will not go away. And the safety and really the trust that Israel needs to regain once again between its leadership and its people. However, you did see amazing stories of secular Israelis, religious Israelis, all coming together after 10/7. No matter where they were on the political map, they understood that this is a war of survival. This is, to a large extent, uh, Israel's second war of independence. I mean, that's how monumental it is when there is a state of Israel in existence. I mean, let's put it into American context. I mean, just the kind of proportionality. This is, close to 40 times of a 9/11. Within the Israeli context of given the size of the state of Israel. So think about that trauma. Um, you know, Everybody in Israel knows somebody. I mean, and that's, in contrast to the tragedy and the trauma that we had after 9/11. But it's a very different reality that we're facing. And I don't think 9/11 is an exact comparison, but just to visualize that point, I see this more as a modern day contemporary Holocaust. When the ideology, which is similar to even more barbaric than Nazism as far as the eradication of the Jewish state, but that's the war Israel was fighting. So on a positive side, volunteerism, are coming together, support is coming together. The unfortunate tragedy of the Jewish people is that they come together in times of need and tragedy. It doesn't need to come to that, but that is the reality that we're seeing today happen. And, I think that's, where you need to kind of look at all this stuff. Psychologically and mentally, I think that the crisis is great. I mean, I think that the PTSD is insurmountable, and this is something that Israel is going to have to deal with for decades to come.
Before we left Israel, my wife and I were talking to a couple Israeli shopkeepers, and they were very interested in the way Americans think about Israel, and they said they feel alone. So I know a lot of our viewers would be like me, a Gentile, Christian Zionist. What can we do better? What can the Christian community do better to support Israel at this time?
Well, first of all, let me be clear. The threats that Israel is facing are Western American threats. I think that, we have an obligation to help our ally, anybody who cares about Western values, Christian values, Jewish values, the whole Judeo-Christianity, and cares about the survival of the state of Israel. The Israelis need help. I mean, tourism is nowhere to be found. The economy is shot. There's going to be a great deal of needs going forward as far as rebuilding, restructuring, service needs the amount of needs are there. So from the PTSD space, there's a lot needs to happen there. Trauma space, hospitals, a great deal that needs to happen going forward. I think that, there is going to be a whole other slew of issues that need to be looked at as far as rebuilding the actual state. I mean, as far as defense industries and whatnot. These are, not to mention, of late I was meeting with, talking to families, the trauma of now you have orphans and you have widowers and you have entirely who need help guiding them because they are left to deal with whoever relative is left. I mean, so you have to help understand that entire psychology. I mean, I think that the pressure needs to be also coming on the, from here to there as well, is ensuring and validating and lobbying and advocating for the maintenance of the U.S.-Israel alliance. Of late, there's been a great deal of conversation about the fact that The airlines who are, American Airlines who's decided not to fly to Israel. Is that a form of boycott? Are you like basically feeding into the Iranian playbook as far as isolating Israel? We need to ensure the fact that we are standing by Israel and ensuring the fact that while Israel is fighting the war, they also need to be able to function, which is very hard to do because of the how much that they are stretched all over the place. Volunteering, wherever one can go, as far as agriculture, as far as manpower, if you can't go physically, I mean, supporting any one of the charities that you guys are working with is critical. Shelters, all of these kind of frontline issues, safe rooms. I mean, Iron Dome is a phenomenal missile defense system which Israel has. It's 95% accurate, but it's not enough. They need the basic things and basic emergency kits in the safe rooms, in the shelters, ambulances, medics, I mean, blood supply. I mean, all of these things that we talk about, basic needs that, Israel needs dealing with this trauma, and not to mention the economics of how the state of Israel and what its needs are. The government can do so much. It's not doing, to my mind, it needs to do a lot more than it's been doing. But this is where, in this space, we can help and make a difference, because there's a lot that needs to happen, and we don't even know at this point, a year later, how extensive the damage is, because there hasn't been they haven't been able to do a full needs assessment while the war is still going on. When you have, the South and the North who are all being pushed into the center, and what this all means for all of those communities, who, the agricultural communities, the small businesses, they need our help.
Your insights are extremely valuable, and I really appreciate you being with us, Asaf.
Thank you so much for the hospitality, and I appreciate the time.
We're grateful that Dr. Romirowsky was able to join us today. Our goal in this series is to equip you with ways you can support and pray for Israel and the Jewish people. If you have not already, you can subscribe to the Friends of Israel's YouTube channel to stay current on all that our ministry has to offer. Our workers in Israel and around the globe are not able to do the work of standing with and bringing hope to Jewish people without you. Please do not cease praying for them. Israel and the Jewish people continue to need our help. If you want to stand with us as we stand with Israel with a financial contribution, visit foi.org/standwithisrael. Once again, that's foi.org/standwithisrael.